I had exactly 32 minutes before the so-called HOA president found out she wasn't in charge anymore. I was. On my very first morning in Cedar Hills, she stomped into my yard like she owned the place, waving a property seizure order that looked like it had been printed in a gas station bathroom. Behind her, a convoy of SUVs, neighbors sipping coffee like they were at a live theater performance, all waiting to see me humiliated. What she didn't know was that I'd been counting down to this moment for 3 months, ever since my grandmother warned me that wolves always show up with noise and a crowd. In exactly 27 minutes, I'd prove I was the real HOA president, and her reign of petty fines and fake rules was about to end in front of the whole neighborhood. "You've got exactly 32 minutes to get off this property," the blonde in the bright red pencil skirt barked, stomping through the dew-soaked grass like she was strutting down a courtroom aisle. Or I call the sheriff, and you'll be dragged out of here. It was 7 in the morning, my very first day waking up in Cedar Hills, and here she was, Marlene Baxter, self-appointed HOA president, waving a crumpled property seizure order like it was the 10 Commandments. The paper was so cheap it curled at the corners. The HOA logo was printed in gray, not black, like the printer had been out of ink. Behind her, a perfect circle of shiny SUVs idled in my driveway, neighbors leaning out their windows with steaming mugs as if this were the morning's entertainment. Some had folding chairs. One guy was eating a breakfast burrito. It was less of a confrontation and more of a matinee performance. What none of them knew, not Marlene, not her convoy of loyal gossip hounds, was that in exactly 27 minutes, the real HOA president would be standing on this lawn. And spoiler alert, it wouldn't be her. I kept my poker face because my grandmother always told me, Jason, bullies love a reaction. Deny them the drama, and they'll dig their own hole. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? I want to see just how far this HOA circus is traveling. 3 days earlier, I'd inherited this 150-year-old farmhouse from my grandmother, Louise Miller, the kind of woman who could bake bread, break up a bar fight, and negotiate a land boundary dispute before lunch. She'd lived here her entire life, raising her family on 12 acres of open pasture that used to be the center of Cedar Hills, back before the farmland was replaced with vinyl-sided luxury homes and HOA bylaws written like prison rules. I'm not just a sentimental grandson either. I'm a historic preservation specialist, 15 years in the field, 3 states' worth of heritage projects saved from demolition. This farm wasn't just a home, it was a living artifact, which made it a giant blinking target for Marlene Baxter and her development company, Baxter Vista Properties. She wasn't subtle about her intentions. For months, she'd been circling my grandmother's land like a hawk eyeing a rabbit. Claire, my sister, is an investigative journalist, and she'd been quietly collecting every slip-up Marlene made: dodgy financial transactions, illegal meeting minutes, even a blurry but damning shot of her lugging giant envelopes out of a 24-hour copy shop at 2 HOA M. Grandma had warned me on her deathbed, "The wolves will come, Jason, and they'll bring an audience to watch you bleed." That morning, I'd been unpacking in the old farmhouse. The place still smelled like my grandmother's lavender polish. I'd just set down an antique cedar chest in the living room, the same chest Grandma kept locked in the attic, always running her hand over it like it held the world's secrets when I heard the low growl of engines rolling up the dirt road. Through the lace curtains, I saw them, a convoy of black and silver SUVs pulling into formation, circling my property like we were reenacting Mad Max HOA Fury Road. Out stepped Marlene in her red skirt, clutching a golden clipboard so shiny it caught the morning sun and probably blinded a few squirrels. The neighbors piled out 2 lawn chairs in one hand, travel mugs in the other. A few of them actually shushed each other so they wouldn't miss anything. The Cedar Hills neighborhood group chat was already lighting up my phone. Mrs. Daly from 2 streets over was live texting like she was covering the Super Bowl. She's here with the clipboard. Looks like official papers. Oh, she's mad. This is going to be good. Half of them were rooting for her. The other half just wanted a show. I took my time walking to the door, stopping to glance at Grandma Louise's framed photo on the mantel. She's about 30 in it, standing in front of this very farmhouse, holding the deed with a grin that said, "Go ahead, Try me. I won't let them take your home. Grandma, I whispered. Promise. I stepped onto the porch to find Marlene already in full performance mode. Mr. Miller, I presume she called, loud enough for the folks in the back row of SUVs to hear. Yes, ma'am. I'm here to inform you that your property is in violation of 17 separate community standards. She snapped the clipboard up like she'd just delivered a death sentence. 17 impressive? I said, checking my watch. Considering I've lived here less than 72 hours. A ripple went through the crowd, a few smirks, a couple raised eyebrows. I noticed Howard Briggs, a retired legal consultant, scribbling furiously in a leather-bound notebook from his perch in a camping chair. The most serious violation, Marlene continued, is the operation of an unauthorized agricultural facility in a residential zone. Section 12.4 of the bylaws clearly states that you can seize my land. I cut in. Yes, for the greater good of the community. She shook the paper at me. I let her speech hang there, then slowly pulled out my phone. The group chat had 93 people watching now. I typed, she's waiving a fake seizure order. Because it was fake, the official HOA logo had been pixelated to death, and I could see printed at Kinko's in tiny gray text in the corner. Howard's voice rang out Marlene. Isn't that the same logo you printed at Ron's copy and print on Tuesday too in the morning in your pajama pants? Gasps. Some laughs. Someone muttered, she does have those duck print PJs. I checked my watch, 27 minutes to go. Mrs. Baxter, I said with my most polite tone, would you mind if I looked at that document closely? I'd hate for either of us to be operating under false assumptions. She hesitated, but the crowd's eyes were on her, so she stepped forward, trying to look confident. The paper was thick, expensive stock she'd gone all out, but the letterhead was off-center. The legal jargon was an overdramatic remix of real HOA terms, and several official signatures were clearly written in the same hand. You've put a lot of work into this. I said, truthfully, creative work. Her smile grew, mistaking my comment for surrender. I looked at my watch again. 26 minutes. What she didn't know was that in less than half an hour, Claire's investigation and the county clerk would blow her entire empire apart. Marlene's smirk widened into something you'd expect from a villain in a soap opera right before a commercial break. She tucked the fake seizure order under one arm and said, with a tone so sweet it could rot teeth, I'm glad you're taking this seriously. Mr. Miller. Her voice carried across my front lawn, just loud enough for the SUV crowd to catch every word. She'd mastered the HOA president's most important skill, projecting authority in public, no matter how flimsy her footing. Then, with a flourish, she reached into her oversized designer purse, the kind of purse that exists less to carry things and more to send a message. Look at me. I have status. From it, she pulled a manila folder so thick you could have used it to prop open a barn door. These documents, she declared, will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the Cedar Hills Homeowners Association has the full legal authority to reclaim this property for community use. I swear to you, she fanned those papers out like a blackjack dealer at a high-stakes Vegas table. The crowd leaned forward as if they'd paid for front-row tickets. A woman in a purple hoodie actually set her coffee on the hood of her SUV so she could clap her hands in anticipation. She handed me the first sheet with the smugness of someone expecting her opponent to crumble. I held it the way I'd hold a rare artifact in a museum, careful, deliberate, and began flipping through the stack. The first thing I noticed was that she'd gone for the expensive stuff, heavy stock paper, crisp printing, highlighted sections, sticky notes jutting out like tabs in a law school textbook. But here's the thing, if you've been around real legal documents long enough, you can spot a fake in seconds. And this was practically wearing a name tag that read, "Hello, I am a fraud." The letterhead was just enough off-center to make the layout scream home printer. The legal language was a Frankenstein mashup of random HOA terms, rearranged to sound official, but ultimately reading like the HOA's angry neighbor wrote it after 3 glasses of Chardonnay. The kicker, 3 different official signatures that were all clearly written by the same hand, same loops, same angle, only difference being the pen colors. If my grandmother were standing next to me, she would have had to cover her mouth to keep from laughing. "This is impressive," I said, making sure my tone was calm and measured. "You've certainly invested a lot of effort here." "Now?" Marlene heard impressive and decided it meant game over. "I win." Her smirk relaxed into a self-satisfied smile, the kind people wear when they think the ending's already been written. "If you voluntarily transfer the property to HOA management within 30 days, she said, turning to make sure her audience caught every syllable, "we will cover your moving expenses up to $5,000 and provide excellent references for more suitable communities." That word suitable wasn't accidental. It was the HOA's polite way of saying, "You don't belong here." I could see a couple of heads in the SUV row nodding along, but there were others, the fence sitters, whose eyebrows twitched. The universal sign of "wait a second, something's off." "That's generous," I said, drawing the words out just enough to make them sound like I was humoring a pushy salesman. Then I pulled out my phone. "Before we talk about moving, I think everyone here should see this." The screen lit up with the first image, a receipt from Ron's Copy and Print. "Order 50 copies of a custom HOA logo design. Timestamp, Tuesday, 2:47 a.m. Paid in cash." I tilted the phone toward the cluster of neighbors in folding chairs. A ripple of murmurs passed through them. Howard Briggs, our resident retired legal consultant, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Well, I'll be damned," he called out. "That's exactly when I saw her at Ron's. Duck print pajama pants and all." Several chuckles rolled through the crowd. One guy in a ball cap muttered, "I knew those were ducks." Someone in the group chat typed, "Duck Gate," and my phone buzzed with the notification. I swiped to the next photo, Marlene leaving the copy shop, hair a mess, clutching a manila envelope in one hand. The pajama bottoms were unmistakable pastel blue with cartoon ducks in rain boots. Gasps. Laughter. Even one of the SUV drivers who'd arrived with her bit the inside of his cheek to keep from smiling. And for the final act, the original design template from Ron's computer system, watermark and all. Across the background, in faint diagonal text sample, it was like finding the magician's trick hat with the rabbit still inside. The restraint in the crowd dissolved. Laughter rippled through the lawn. Howard was now wiping his glasses, shaking his head in disbelief. Mrs. Daly in the group chat sent nothing but a string of fire emojis. The counter hit 145 active participants. Those were for a legitimate community newsletter. Marlene blurted, her voice sharper now, completely taken out of context. "Sure," I said, keeping my tone mild. "And I'm the Queen of England." More laughter. Someone near the back actually did a slow clap, the kind meant to sting. That's when my phone buzzed in my hand, and I saw the name Claire flash on the screen. I put it on speaker. "Jason," she said, her voice clear and confident. "The county clerk's truck just turned onto your road. She's got the results from yesterday's emergency HOA election." The reaction was immediate. The laughter stopped. Heads turned toward the dirt road leading up to my property. Even Marlene froze, her smirk faltering for the first time all morning. She hadn't been expecting this. Not the clerk. Not an election. Not a public reveal. The low growl of an old Ford pickup grew louder as it approached. A plume of dust trailed behind it, catching the morning sun. Janet Morrison, county clerk for 30 years, drove like someone who didn't believe in wasting time, one hand on the wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. When she parked and stepped out, you could tell she wasn't here for the coffee and gossip. She was in practical work boots, a button-up shirt rolled to the elbows, and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been to more city hall meetings than most people in Cedar Hills had attended in their lives. Janet walked right up to the center of the lawn, planted her boots in the grass, and raised her voice with the kind of authority that doesn't need a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I'm here to deliver the official results of yesterday's emergency HOA election." The group chat was pinging like mad messages, flying so fast I couldn't read them. People who weren't here were already begging for updates. Marlene's jaw tightened. Her grip on that golden clipboard turned her knuckles white. This wasn't part of her script. I glanced at my watch. 23 minutes ahead of schedule. Her clock and her reign was running out fast. Janet's gaze swept over the gathering like a lighthouse beam. methodical and steady. The chatter that had been buzzing moments earlier died to a tense silence. Even the idling SUVs seemed to hush, their engines purring at a lower pitch as if the machines themselves knew something important was about to go down. She stepped forward, boots sinking slightly into the damp morning grass, and unlatched the brass clasp on her worn leather briefcase. Her voice, when she spoke, had the calm authority of someone who'd read out more verdicts than she cared to count. "I have here," she began, her tone deliberate, "the certified and sealed results of the emergency Cedar Hills HOA election conducted yesterday evening. The election was held in strict accordance with both county regulations and the original Cedar Hills Charter." The words "original charter" landed like a sharp rock tossed into still water. Heads tilted, whispers ran through the group, and over by the front of the SUV circle, Marlene's head whipped toward Janet like she'd just been jabbed with a cattle prod. What election, she demanded. The pitch of her voice rose just enough to betray that first thin crack in her confidence. Janet's face didn't so much as twitch. She had the kind of composure you get from 30 years of dealing with everything from angry farmers to town council meltdowns. "I'll remind you, Mrs. Baxter," she said evenly. 3 official notices of the election were sent to your registered HOA email over the past month. Copies of those notices were also posted on the community bulletin board at the clubhouse and filed with the county office. "They never reached me," Marlene shot back quickly, like a student trying to talk over the teacher before the pop quiz starts. Janet looked down at the papers in her hand, then back up at her audience. "According to our records, all 3 emails were returned as undelivered because the recipient marked them as spam." That word spam sparked a ripple of low, knowing murmurs. Mrs. Daly muttered something about selective inboxes to her neighbor. Howard Briggs gave a short, sharp bark of laughter. It was the kind of crowd reaction that said, "We're connecting the dots, and we don't like the picture we're seeing." In the front row of folding chairs, a woman in a purple hoodie leaned toward her husband and whispered, not quietly enough, so she didn't even read them. He shrugged, but the side eye he gave Marlene spoke volumes. The SUV crowd, once her loyal peanut gallery, was starting to fracture. I could see people subtly shifting their weight, no longer leaning forward in anticipation of her triumph, but holding themselves back, waiting to see where this was going. Janet, unfazed, reached into her briefcase and pulled out a large envelope sealed with the county's embossed stamp. She held it up just long enough for the sunlight to flash across the gold-pressed lettering. "As county clerk," she said, "it is my duty to report the certified results of this election. Out of 63 registered voters, representing 47% of all eligible HOA members, the vote was decided as follows." Her thumb broke the seal. The faint crinkle of tearing paper sounded loud in the hushed yard. Janet unfolded the results, scanning them with her finger before reading aloud. Jason Miller, 78% of the votes cast. Marlene Baxter, 22%. For a heartbeat, Cedar Hills fell into a silence so complete you could have heard the flutter of a bird's wings. Then Howard Briggs, bless him, started clapping. 1, 2, 3. Slow, deliberate claps. The kind you give at the end of a very bad play when you're trying to be polite but also make a point. Others joined in hesitantly, 1 here, 2 there, and then the applause spread like fire on dry brush. By the 5th clap, nearly half the crowd was in on it. From where I stood, I could see the flickers of uncertainty in the faces of the people who had arrived with Marlene. One man in mirrored sunglasses gave a little shrug, as if to say, "Well, I guess that's that." Marlene, though, stood rooted in place. Her golden clipboard was clamped so tightly in her hand that her knuckles were white. The applause wasn't touching her. She was staring at me like she could will me out of existence. "This is impossible," she burst out suddenly, her voice cracking on the second word. "You can't just hold an election without proper notice. I have rights as the sitting president?" Howard, still on his feet, turned toward her with the calm certainty of a man who's been waiting years to deliver this speech. "The original HOA charter," he said, each word clipped and precise, "allows for emergency elections in the event that credible allegations of misconduct are brought against a sitting president. And thanks to your own financial records, Mrs. Baxter, those allegations were Very credible. The word misconduct landed like a hammer. Several heads turned back toward Marlene. Someone coughed. Janet stepped forward then, the kind of step that says we're moving on now whether you like it or not. In her hand was a fresh clipboard with a neat stack of forms clipped to it. "Mr. Miller," she said, "as the newly elected president of the Cedar Hills Homeowners Association, these documents will formalize the transfer of authority. Please sign here and here." I took the pen, its weight unexpectedly heavy in my hand. As I bent to sign my name, I felt the moment stretch. This wasn't just about me. It was my grandmother's voice in my head, telling me the wolves would come and I'd have to be ready. Her farm, her fight, now mine. When I handed the clipboard back to Janet, the applause returned, softer now, but steadier. Neighbors I'd never spoken to in my life came up to shake my hand. Someone pressed a still warm slice of banana bread into my palm. A kid in a baseball cap tugged on his mother's sleeve and asked, "Is he the new boss now?" "Something like that," she whispered back. But even in the middle of the congratulations, I kept my eyes on Marlene. She hadn't moved toward the SUVs. She hadn't congratulated me. She hadn't even put down that golden clipboard. Instead, she was hunched over her phone, thumbs flying with the kind of speed you only see when someone is either rage texting their lawyer or plotting their next attack. And I knew that look. It was the same look I'd seen on developers in county boardrooms when the vote didn't go their way, a mix of fury, calculation, and just enough hope to convince themselves they could still turn it around. I'd just signed my way into the presidency of an HOA that was finally free of her chokehold. But if there's one thing my sister Claire's reporting had taught me, it was this: people like Marlene don't go quietly. They double down. They call in favors. They get creative in all the wrong ways. And judging by the speed at which she was stabbing that phone screen, Marlene Baxter was about to get very creative. Her reign had been cut short in public, but something told me she had no intention of leaving the battlefield without one last fight. If there's one thing I've learned about HOA power junkies, it's that they treat defeat like a bad haircut, hide it for a week, then come back acting like nothing happened. The only problem, Marlene Baxter wasn't giving herself a week. The next morning, I was sitting at my grandmother's old oak kitchen table, coffee in one hand, a stack of HOA financial records in the other, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Patricia Wells, County Attorney. I answered, and her tone was already dipped in that professional neutrality lawyers use when they're about to ruin your day. "Mr. Miller, I'm calling to inform you that we've received a formal legal challenge to yesterday's HOA election results, filed by attorney Marcus Thornfield on behalf of Mrs. Baxter." She didn't pause for my reaction. "The complaint alleges voter fraud, failure to disclose conflicts of interest, and manipulation of the election process through financial incentives to HOA members." I sat back, letting the words sink in. Voter fraud, conflicts of interest. I'd been president for less than 24 hours and already she was painting me like a crooked politician. Patricia wasn't finished. "Mr. Thornfield has also secured a temporary restraining order that suspends your authority as HOA president until a full investigation is conducted." There it was, Marlene's first counterstrike. Clever, too. She'd found herself a real attorney with 4 decades of municipal law experience and a reputation for making opponents wish they'd stayed home. By noon, the news had seeped into the Cedar Hills group chat like a gas leak. The same neighbors who'd been clapping on my lawn yesterday were now posting long, uneasy messages about due process and not rushing to judgment. Mrs. Peterson from Willow Street wrote an entire paragraph about how this could cost the HOA thousands in legal fees. A few people hinted that maybe Marlene had a point. Others said they were just tired of drama and wished both sides would drop it. And just like that, the community that had been united for one glorious afternoon was splitting into factions. Howard Briggs, ever the tactician, called an emergency community meeting at the library, the same place we'd held the election 2 nights before. I showed up early, but Marlene arrived late and made sure everyone noticed. She walked in with Marcus Thornfield at her side, her golden clipboard swapped for a navy blue business suit that practically screamed competence. The messy pajama pants image from yesterday was gone. Today, she was here to play the role of the reasonable professional. "I want everyone to understand," she began, standing at the front like she owned the room, "that I take no pleasure in this, but we cannot allow our community to be taken over by someone with hidden agendas and questionable methods." I let her talk. She was good, I'll give her that. Each accusation was sharp but wrapped in just enough politeness to sound like concern. She claimed Claire's investigative work had been funded by outside development interests. She hinted that my historic preservation background was really a cover to commercialize the farm. She even suggested that my moving in immediately after my grandmother's death was proof I'd been planning this coup for months. Every allegation had a sprinkle of truth, just enough to make it harder to swat down outright. Then, from the third row, an elderly woman I barely knew stood up. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 37 years, she said, voice steady. "And in the past 2 years, I've watched you fine my grandson for riding his bike too loud, threaten my neighbor over her choice of flowers, and call the police on a children's birthday party." Her name was Margaret Sullivan, and once she opened the floodgates, the rest of the room followed. Tom Rodriguez stood and recounted how she'd fined him $300 for painting his fence the wrong shade of white. Jennifer Walsh told the room about the time Marlene had shown up at her daughter's 8th birthday party with a decibel meter. It wasn't just me versus Marlene anymore. It was years of pent-up neighborhood resentment spilling into the open. Howard, sensing the moment, turned to Thornfield. "Who's paying for your services?" The attorney cleared his throat and gave a vague answer about community funding and contingency arrangements. His evasiveness only fueled suspicion, especially when paired with the financial irregularities already surfacing in the HOA books. That was my cue. I didn't give a speech. Instead, I hooked my laptop up to the projector and pulled up the HOA's bank statements, the ones I'd spent all morning reviewing. "Let's all take a look," I said. It was more effective than any monologue I could have delivered. The numbers spoke for themselves. "Pool maintenance, $15,000, Jennifer read aloud. "We don't even have a pool." "Landscape consulting, $12,000, Margaret added. "My yard looks exactly the same as it did 2 years ago." Then Howard found the smoking gun, Baxter Property Solutions, $40,000 over the past 18 months. "Isn't that your husband's company, Mrs. Baxter?" Silence. Margaret broke it with a quiet, "Well, I'll be damned." Marlene tried to recover, claiming it was all legitimate and that community improvement requires professional expertise. But the room had turned. Even Thornfield looked like he'd rather be somewhere else. The meeting ended with a vote to request a full, independent audit of HOA finances, 37-3. As people filed out, I caught sight of Marlene near the back, her expression unreadable. But I recognized the stiffness in her shoulders, the tight set of her jaw. She wasn't finished. And I had a feeling that the next round wouldn't be played in a library meeting room. The morning after the library meeting, I woke up to find Howard Briggs sitting on my front porch like a cat who just dropped a mouse on the doorstep. He had a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and his laptop balanced on his knees. "Jason," he called as soon as I opened the door. "You're going to want to see this." I stepped outside, and he spun the laptop around. On the screen was the Cedar Hills community Facebook page, the kind of place usually reserved for lost pet notices, passive-aggressive lawn care complaints, and suspicious vehicle alerts. But today, it was a war zone. The overnight activity had exploded into hundreds of comments, shares, and tags. But the real star was the video Harold had posted at 11:30 p.m. the night before. It was crystal clear footage of the exact moment Marlene's polished mask had cracked during the library meeting. Harold had been perfectly positioned, catching both her expression and her words, when Howard confronted her about the $40,000 in payments to her husband's company. "I lost everything in 2019, she said in the video, her voice shaking. The bankruptcy, the foreclosure, the humiliation of starting over at 43. I couldn't fail again, not in front of everyone. I just wanted to build something beautiful, something that would make people respect me again." It wasn't just a financial confession, it was raw vulnerability. For the first time, people could see that beneath the bluster and control, there was a woman driven by desperation and fear. "That," Harold said, Tapping the screen isn't just gossip fodder. It's an admission of financial impropriety. Caught on camera. I watched the share counter tick upward. 47 shares overnight might not sound like much, but in a township of 200 residents, that was practically going viral. And the comments weren't just from Cedar Hills. People from neighboring communities were chiming in with their own HOA horror stories, some eerily similar to ours. Then Harold's phone rang. He answered on speaker. "Howard, it's Sheriff Reynolds," came the gravelly voice on the other end. "I've been watching that video, and I think it's time we had a conversation about Mrs. Baxter." Howard raised his eyebrows at me. "Go on." The sheriff didn't mince words. "We've been investigating her for 6 months based on a complaint your sister, Claire, filed. What happened at that meeting? That's the last piece we needed. We're moving forward." Turns out, Marlene's behavior in Cedar Hills was just one stop in a pattern that stretched across 4 other communities in the last 3 years. The sheriff laid it out: infiltrate an HOA board, consolidate power, redirect community funds to projects involving friends or relatives, and move on before anyone could organize enough opposition to stop her. The video, combined with Claire's meticulous documentation, tipped the case from suspected misconduct into full-blown criminal territory. The charges on the table: fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit theft. Sheriff Reynolds said he'd be at my place within half an hour. "We'll also be lifting that restraining order today," he added. "Court orders already in motion." For the first time since I'd signed my name on that clipboard, I felt the pressure ease off my shoulders. When the sheriff's SUV pulled into my driveway, I half expected a made-for-TV arrest scene: flashing lights, handcuffs, the whole 9 yards. But that's not what happened. Instead, Marlene arrived at the sheriff's office voluntarily, Thornfield at her side, carrying a briefcase full of HOA financial records. It was like she'd skipped straight past denial and landed in damage control mode. When the charges were finally filed, they reflected both the seriousness of her actions and the complicated motives behind them: 3 counts of embezzlement, 2 counts of fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit theft. The sentence surprised everyone, even me. No jail time. Instead, she got 18 months of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service. But here's the twist: the service had to be with nonprofit organizations that focused on financial literacy and bankruptcy recovery. The community's reaction was complicated. Sure, there was satisfaction in knowing she'd been held accountable, but there was also a ripple of sympathy. Margaret Sullivan summed it up best when she told the local paper, "What she did was wrong, but once you know why she did it, it's harder to just celebrate her downfall." The independent audit revealed the damage: nearly $60,000 misappropriated over 18 months. But most of it had technically gone toward legitimate community improvements, just without competitive bidding or proper authorization. Baxter Property Solutions had done solid work at a premium price. Claire's role in all of this didn't go unnoticed. She got formal recognition from the county government and even a nod from a state-level journalism group. More importantly, she became a trusted contact for other communities suspicious of their own HOA boards. But I knew, and she knew, this wasn't over. 3 nights later, the phone rang again. This time it was a woman named Sarah Chen from Riverside Meadows, a development 20 miles east. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice trembling. "They're trying to take my grandmother's house. The HOA president says it's not historically significant, but my family's lived here since 1923. I saw the news story about what you did here, and someone gave me your number." Her desperation was like an echo of mine just days earlier. And as much as I wanted to tell her I was done with HOA wars for a while, I already knew my answer. Because the fight here in Cedar Hills might have ended, but the pattern, that was still out there. Sarah Chen's voice still rang in my ears long after I hung up. Riverside Meadows, 20 miles away. Same playbook, but before I could commit to helping her, there was unfinished business right here in Cedar Hills. Marlene's downfall had left a vacuum: no legitimate governing structure, no clear path forward, and a neighborhood split between cautious optimism and deep mistrust. That's when Janet Morrison, the county clerk, stopped by with a file folder under her arm. "You're going to need the original HOA founding documents if you want to rebuild this thing from the ground up," she said, sliding the folder across my kitchen table. Problem is, I've only ever seen photocopies. If the originals still exist, they'd be in your grandmother's possession. And knowing Louise, she wouldn't have kept them in the obvious place. Her words triggered a memory my grandmother, years ago in the attic, her hands resting on an old cedar chest. She'd always treated it like something sacred, never letting anyone touch it, never explaining what was inside. That night, I climbed up to the attic with a flashlight. Dust motes swirled in the beam as I knelt by the chest. I ran my hand along the lid, feeling the familiar grooves in the wood. No keyhole, no obvious latch. Then I remembered another one of her quirks. She'd keep the key to anything important, hidden somewhere equally sentimental. It hit me like a hammer. The sewing machine. Sure enough, when I slid open the bottom drawer of her old Singer machine, there was a small brass key taped underneath. Back in the living room, I fit it into the chest's lock and turned. The lid creaked open, releasing a faint scent of cedar, lavender, and something older like history itself. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, was a circular seal carved from a single piece of oak. The wood grain shimmered under the light, and the engraving read, Cedar Hills Homeowners Association, established 1923. Beneath it lay a leather-bound folder. I lifted it out carefully, like it might crumble in my hands. When I opened it, I felt like I'd stumbled into a different world. The charter's first page was signed by 12 founding families, including my great-grandmother's name. The language was simple but powerful. The undersigned families of Cedar Hills Township do hereby establish this association to protect our agricultural heritage and ensure that future generations may benefit from the wisdom of those who worked this soil before us. But the part that made me sit back in my chair was a clause halfway down the second page. The Cole family farm is designated as the Heritage Anchor property. Its descendants shall serve as guardians of the association's founding principles, with the authority to reconstitute the organization if it strays from its original purpose. In other words, I wasn't just president because of a vote. By the original rules, I was the permanent safeguard against exactly what Marlene had tried to do. By mid-afternoon, word had gotten out, as it always does in a small town, and neighbors began showing up at the farm. But this time, it wasn't in SUVs forming a siege circle. Margaret Sullivan arrived with her famous apple pie. Tom Rodriguez brought a portable sound system. Jennifer Walsh corralled the kids into a sidewalk chalk project on the driveway that read in big looping letters, "Welcome to the new Cedar Hills." By sunset, nearly 100 people were on my front lawn. They sat in folding chairs, plates balanced on their knees, listening as I held the original charter aloft. What I'm about to share, I began, isn't just a piece of paper. It's a blueprint for a community that works together instead of tearing itself apart. Our founders didn't build this place so it could be run like a corporate boardroom. They built it so neighbors could look out for each other. I read the key passages aloud, and something shifted in the air. People started volunteering for roles I hadn't even mentioned yet: historical preservation, youth programs, environmental projects. We decided then and there to dissolve the old HOA structure and replace it with a Heritage Community Council, representatives from each street. Decisions made by consensus. No mandatory fees. Contributions would be voluntary, based on what people could afford, not on property value. As the crowd dispersed, Howard lingered near the porch steps, flipping through the last pages of the charter, his brow furrowed. "Jason," he said, beckoning me over. "There's something here you need to see." He handed me an envelope, its wax seal still intact. The front read, "To be opened only in the association's greatest crisis." It was addressed to my descendant, in the handwriting of my great-great-grandmother. I slid my thumb under the wax and felt a weight in my chest that had nothing to do with the paper. Inside were 2 pages and a revelation I hadn't been prepared for. If you are reading this, it means the wolves have come for what we built, and you have found the strength to fight back. But this farm is not the only place under threat. She went on to explain that the 12 original families had quietly purchased land across the region, each parcel protected by similar heritage agreements. A hand-drawn map at the bottom marked each site. Some were crossed out, labeled lost. Others had notes like still secure or under pressure. And in the margins, a warning: The wolves will wear many masks. Their goal is always the same: to erase the past so they can sell the future. Howard studied the map over my shoulder. If this is accurate, he said quietly, what happened here isn't an isolated case. There are at least 6 other communities right now fighting the same battle, whether they know it or not. I looked down at the seal, the charter, the map, and thought of Sarah Chen's call from Riverside Meadows. The wolves weren't just in Cedar Hills. They were everywhere. And thanks to my grandmother and her grandmother before her, I now had the tools to fight them. That night, I spread the map from my great-great-grandmother's letter across the kitchen table. The edges were frayed, the ink faded in spots, but the markings were clear enough to follow. 12 original heritage sites, 5 already lost to development, 6 still standing, but marked with ominous notes like developer interest high or HOA compromised. Riverside Meadows, where Sarah Chen lived, was one of them. Another was Hartwell Farms, 30 miles south, marked with a shaky underline, and the words structural integrity challenged a developer's favorite phrase when they wanted to condemn something solid. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept turning over the same question: how do you fight a war across 6 different fronts when you barely finished your first battle? By morning, I had my answer. You don't fight alone. Claire showed up just after sunrise, coffee in one hand, a thick folder in the other. I've been digging into Golden Vista Development, she said, flipping it open on the table. They're not the only ones. There's an entire web of shell companies with different names, but the money all traces back to the same investors. She pointed to a flowchart of corporate connections that looked like a spider had spun a web out of red ink. They've been using HOA infiltration as a primary acquisition method for years. Create problems, inflate costs, push a sale to a developer they control. Rinse and repeat. The more she explained, the more I realized my great-great-grandmother had been right. Cedar Hills wasn't unique. We just happened to fight back early enough to win. Howard dropped by mid-morning, legal pad under his arm. If you're thinking about going after these other communities, you'll need to structure something more than a bunch of well-meaning neighbors swapping stories. He was right. I grabbed a marker and started sketching on the back of an old HOA meeting poster Heritage Council Network, an umbrella group connecting all heritage-protected communities. Legal team Howard already volunteered to advise. Media arm Claire's territory. Preservation specialists, that one was on me. By the time lunch rolled around, the plan was taking shape. Cedar Hills would serve as the pilot, a proof of concept to show other neighborhoods that they could dismantle a corrupt HOA and replace it with a cooperative council. I called Sarah Chen first, told her about the map, the charter, the network we were building. She didn't even hesitate. Tell me what to do. She said, we're ready to fight. Then I called Hartwell Farms. A man named Marcus Webb answered, his voice tight with frustration. The HOA president here says our historic barn is unsafe and needs to be demolished. He said, but my grandfather helped build it in 1934. It's solid as a rock. They just want the land for a shopping center. Different town. Same story. Within a week, we'd made contact with all 6 communities still marked as under pressure on the map. Some were further along in their fights. Others didn't even realize they were in danger yet. Claire started hosting weekly Zoom calls to connect them all. We shared legal strategies, media tactics, even fundraising ideas for repairs so the structural integrity excuse couldn't be used against them. It wasn't glamorous. Half the time, the calls were interrupted by barking dogs or bad Wi-Fi. But the progress was real. For the first time, these communities weren't isolated targets. They were a coalition. 6 months later, Cedar Hills hosted the first Heritage Communities Festival on my grandmother's farm. We had over 500 people from 8 different townships. Kids learned traditional farming techniques in the vegetable garden. Adults attended workshops on conflict resolution, budgeting, and how to read an HOA's financial statements without falling asleep. In the middle of it all, I saw Marlene. She was there voluntarily, part of her community service. But she wasn't the same Marlene who had once strutted onto my lawn with a fake seizure order and a circle of SUVs. She was in jeans and a plain shirt, hair pulled back, guiding a small group through a Basics of Bankruptcy recovery workshop. I spent so many years trying to look successful, she told me later, That I forgot how to be useful, helping people avoid the mistakes I made. It's not redemption, but it's a start. I believed her, maybe because I'd seen her at her worst, or maybe because, in her own way, she'd helped me see how deep the rot went and why it was worth tearing out. In the late afternoon, as the festival wound down, my phone rang. Mr. Miller. The voice was crisp, professional. This is Dr. Amanda Foster from the National Historic Trust. We've been following what you've done in Cedar Hills. I'd like to discuss a formal partnership between your Heritage Council network and our national preservation programs. I looked out across the festival grounds, families eating together, kids playing tag under the oak trees, representatives from different towns swapping contact information. For the first time, I thought, we're not just defending the past anymore. We're building the future. Then my phone buzzed again, a text from Sarah Chen. Emergency HOA meeting called for tomorrow. They're trying to vote tonight while most people are at your festival. We need help. I turned to Claire. She was already grabbing her bag and car keys. The wolves weren't resting. And apparently, neither were we. By the time we reached Riverside Meadows, the sun was sliding behind the rooftops, painting the cul-de-sacs in long shadows. The place looked like a developer's dream and a preservationist's nightmare. Identical beige houses lined the streets like copy-paste architecture, interrupted only by the occasional ornamental tree planted with military precision. Sarah Chen was waiting for us at the corner of Willow and 9th. She was in her late 30s, wearing a faded sweatshirt and gripping a manila folder so tight her knuckles were white. Her eyes darted toward the community clubhouse. "They're in there now," she said, voice low. Technically, it's not the meeting yet. They're just discussing agenda items, but I've lived here long enough to know that's when the real decisions get made. Claire exchanged a look with me. How many board members? 5. Sarah said, President, Vice President, Treasurer, and 2 at-large members. The president's name is Leonard Pike. He's been pushing for months to remove unsafe structures, starting with my grandmother's house. I knew the tactic: frame a property as a safety hazard, inflate repair costs, then declare it in the community's best interest to demolish. What's his angle? I asked. Sarah's mouth tightened. He's also on the board of a development firm that's been sniffing around the empty lots here. My guess, he wants the land, not the liability of keeping anything old. Claire was already flipping through the folders Sarah had brought. Inside were printouts of meeting minutes, repair estimates, and a few grainy photos. One estimate jumped out: $180,000 to bring the property up to code. I recognized the name of the contracting company. It was the same one Marlene Baxter had used for landscape consulting back in Cedar Hills. We walked toward the clubhouse, the muffled sound of voices spilling out when someone opened the door. Inside, the fluorescent lighting gave everyone a faint greenish hue fitting, given the money games being played. Pike was seated at the head of the table, a tall man with neatly combed silver hair and the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Beside him sat the treasurer, tapping on a calculator like it was a nervous tick. Sarah stayed in the doorway while Claire and I stepped in. I didn't bother with subtlety. Mind if I sit in? I've got some experience with historic property disputes. Pike glanced up, eyes narrowing. This is a board discussion. Perfect, I said, pulling out a chair. Then you'll want someone who knows the legal definition of unsafe structure. For a moment, the only sound was the treasurer's calculator beeping. Pike leaned back in his chair. And you are Jason Miller, Cedar Hills Heritage Council. You might have seen the news about our recent leadership change. Something flickered across his face: recognition, maybe irritation, but he didn't tell me to leave. That was enough of an opening. Claire slid a printed copy of the $180,000 estimate across the table. Funny thing, she said, her tone conversational. This contractor also billed $15,000 for pool maintenance in a neighborhood with no pool. One of the at-large members, a younger guy in a plaid shirt, looked up sharply. Wait, what? I didn't waste the moment. Here's the thing, I said, pulling my grandmother's charter from my bag. Historic properties can't just be declared unsafe and demolished on a whim. Not if they're protected under a heritage designation. Sarah tells me her family's property dates back to 1923, which puts it in the same category as my own. Pike's jaw tightened. We're not bound by Cedar Hills policies. No, I agreed. But you are bound by state preservation laws. And I can promise you that if you move ahead with this without a proper structural inspection by a licensed third party, you're looking at a legal challenge that'll make your board wish you'd stuck to picking flower bed colors. The younger at-large member spoke again, this time louder. My grandparents' place is from the same era. Does that mean they could target it next? Pike shot him a look that could have melted paint. But it was too late. The question was out there. Claire leaned forward. It's the same pattern we've seen in 5 other communities. Inflate the costs, declare the property unsafe, sell the land. Only difference is how fast they try to push the vote through. By now, Sarah had stepped fully into the room, her voice steadier than when we'd met at the corner. My grandmother's house isn't a liability. It's a piece of this neighborhood's history. And if you think you can erase that without a fight, you're wrong. The room shifted. I could feel it. The treasurer avoided eye contact. The younger member was openly frowning. Even the vice president was tapping a pen against the table, the rhythm betraying her unease. Pike stood, adjusting his suit jacket. We'll reconvene tomorrow for the official meeting, he said, voice tight. Board members only. That's fine, I said, rising too. We'll be there, and so will half the neighborhood. See ya. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. Sarah let out a long breath. Do you really think we can stop them? I smiled, remembering the circle of SUVs on my lawn in Cedar Hills. If they're playing the same game Marlene played, we don't just stop them. We teach them what losing feels like. Claire was already on her phone, texting Howard to start digging into Pike's corporate ties. The wolves had circled Riverside Meadows. Now it was our turn to circle back. The next evening, Riverside Meadows looked different. It wasn't just the lowering sun or the crisp bite in the autumn air, it was the way people were moving. No one was walking their dog or trimming hedges. They were heading, with purpose, toward the community clubhouse. Claire and I got there early with Sarah. We didn't bother sneaking in this time. The front doors were propped open, and the muffled hum of conversations echoed into the parking lot. Inside, the setup was classic HOA theater, the board table at the front, 5 chairs in a neat line, pitchers of water and stacks of paper. Leonard Pike sat in the center, posture perfect, expression carefully neutral. The vice president, treasurer, and the 2 at-large members flanked him, each with a binder in front of them. The rows of folding chairs for the residents were already filling up. By my count, at least 50 people had shown way more than Pike had expected. The meeting opened with Pike's voice as smooth as a new jar of peanut butter. This will be a productive discussion, he said, about the future safety and financial health of our community. Translation, I'm about to push through something you won't like, but I'm going to make it sound like I'm doing you a favor. He jumped straight to Agenda Item 1, a motion to approve the demolition of unsafe structures, a list that conveniently started with Sarah Chen's grandmother's house. This motion is about protecting residents, Pike said, hands folded. We've all seen the reports. Claire stood before I could. Quick question, she said, holding up the $180,000 repair estimate. Was this bid competitively sourced? Pike's eyes narrowed. The board vetted the contractor thoroughly. Interesting, Claire said, flipping the page, because this contractor also billed $15,000 for pool maintenance in Cedar Hills, a community with no pool. That got murmurs from the crowd. People leaned toward their neighbors, whispering. The younger at-large member from last night cleared his throat. I wasn't aware of that. Pike tried to bulldoze past it, but I wasn't about to let him. I stepped forward with a folder of my own. Under state preservation law, I said, no structure over 50 years old can be demolished without an independent inspection from a licensed historical structural engineer. The treasurer shuffled papers nervously. Pike's jaw twitched, and I continued. Sarah's property dates back to 1923, which means if you move forward without that inspection, you're not just risking a lawsuit, you're violating state law. The vice president glanced at Pike. Is that true? She asked, her voice lower but not low enough to escape the crowd's attention. Then Sarah stood up. Her voice was clear, steady. My grandmother raised 5 children in that house. It's the only place in this neighborhood that still shows what Riverside Meadows looked like before the developers came. You tear it down, you're not protecting the community. You're erasing it. That was the turning point. The murmurs turned into claps. Margaret Sullivan's equivalent in this neighborhood, a woman named Betty Harper, rose to speak. "Leonard, this isn't about safety. This is about you wanting that land." And I think most of us here know it. Pike's smooth veneer started to crack. "That is an outrageous accusation." "Outrageous," Betty shot back, "like billing us for landscaping consultations that never happened, or approving contracts with companies your development firm is tied to." Gasps from the crowd. Claire handed a stack of printed records to the younger at-large member. "Public documents." She said, "Corporate registrations, contractor lists, dates and amounts. You'll notice some interesting overlaps." Pike's voice rose. "This meeting is out of order." "No," I said, stepping up beside Sarah. "This meeting is the first one that's been in order in a long time." The younger member looked up from the papers, face pale. "Leonard, is this true?" Pike didn't answer. It was Betty Harper who made the motion. "I propose we hold an emergency vote of no confidence in the current HOA president." The room erupted, voices agreeing, hands going up. The vice president hesitated, then slowly raised her own hand. The treasurer followed. The younger member's hand shot up next. 4-1. Pike was out. The cheer that followed wasn't loud in volume, but it was loud in meaning. People started hugging Sarah. Betty clasped my hand and whispered, "Thank you for showing up." Pike stood slowly, gathering his binder, his expression frozen. He didn't look at me, or Claire, or Sarah as he walked out the side door. Outside, under the cold glow of the parking lot lights, Sarah turned to me. "You think this will hold, that they won't try something else?" I smiled. "They'll try. They always do. But now you've got a network behind you." And as Claire and I walked back to the car, I knew this was just one more link in the chain my great-great-grandmother started a century ago, a chain the wolves would keep trying to break. They'd have to get through us first. 2 weeks after Riverside Meadows voted Leonard Pike out, the place felt different. You could see it in the way people lingered on their porches at dusk, in the casual clusters of neighbors chatting by the mailboxes. Even Sarah's grandmother's house, still standing proud on its corner lot, seemed to sit a little taller, its weathered siding catching the afternoon light like it was daring anyone to come for it again. The new interim board had already voted to suspend all demolition plans until independent inspections could be completed. Sarah sent me photos of the inspector's report when it came back structurally sound, minimal repairs needed, exactly as we'd suspected. Pike, he'd resigned from the board entirely within days of the vote, citing personal reasons, which was HOA speak for the jig is up. Back in Cedar Hill, as far as heritage, our council, their network Troy kept growing. 2 more communities had reached out, both with eerily familiar stories about inflated repair costs and developer-friendly board members. We added them to the weekly calls. Claire was busier than ever, turning each victory into a case study other neighborhoods could follow. Howard was drafting a simple community defense kit, a plain language guide to bylaws, state preservation laws, and what to look for in shady HOA contracts. Sarah had already volunteered Riverside Meadows as the next festival host. The map from my great-great-grandmother's letter hung framed in my office now, each under pressure site slowly getting a green checkmark when we secured it. One evening, I was sitting on the farmhouse porch with a cup of coffee when Margaret Sullivan came by. She handed me a plate of cookies and sat down without asking. "You've changed this place," she said simply. "Not just the bylaws or the meetings. You reminded folks they could stand together. I thought of my grandmother's cedar chest, the carved seal, the signatures in the charter. I didn't do it alone. I said, we just needed a reason to believe the fight was worth it." Margaret smiled. "And now you've got a whole line of towns who believe it too." It struck me then how much bigger this had become than Cedar Hills or even my own family's land. The wolves weren't just circling here. They were roaming from one community to another, wearing different faces but always chasing the same thing, profit over people. And the only way to stop them was exactly what my great-great-grandmother had written a century ago: stand together, protect the heritage, and make sure change serves the people who live with its consequences. So here's my question for you. Have you ever felt powerless against bullies who hide behind rules and titles? Maybe it's an overzealous HOA president, a workplace tyrant, or someone in your own neighborhood who thrives on intimidation. You're not powerless, but you can't win alone. You win by preparing, by finding your allies, by knowing the rules better than the people who twist them. And you win by standing your ground long enough for the truth to do its work. If our story lit a spark in you, share it. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what your own HOA battle looks like. And if you want more stories where ordinary people stand up to abuse of power and win, subscribe because the wolves aren't going away, but neither are we.